Welcome to Writers Not Writing. This used to be a show where I interviewed authors about the ways they procrastinated, and I'm sure we'll still have some of that. But in these times, I want to use this show to highlight artists who are using their voices to push back against fascism. Whether we're writing or not writing, we need to be defending one another. I'm Benjamin Gorman, your friendly author in exile, and the quiet guy behind the glass there is Doug the producer, who hitched a ride in my suitcase. I write novels and collections of poetry and stuff, and Doug does his best to make me sound better. Welcome to Writers Not Writing. You're going to enjoy today's show. And if you want a little more, become a patron of my Patreon, help me keep a roof over my head, and you'll get access to an ad-free version of the show with a bonus segment with each interviewee. Okay, here we go.
If I take my time.
Hail and well met readers and reviewers. Very excited about this show. I am always excited to get to see Brian Parker, our guest. Those of you who've heard the show before recognize Brian. Brian is the co-owner of Believe in Wonder, a youth-focused publishing company in Beaverton, Oregon. He's an author, illustrator, and educator with over 20 books to his credit, currently an adjunct professor at Portland State University's English department. Brian, how are you doing? It is really good to see your face.
It's really good to see your face too, Ben. I'm so glad that we got a chance to do this and keep our connections and stuff going, with you abroad. And it's just nice to be up and in my space and working. So
and we had to postpone because your boys got sick. How are they doing? Are they all healed up?
They are doing insane.
Yeah,
which is kind of the kind of basic setup around here. But yeah, this morning they were up and out, and they were excited for school and excited for life. And I am completely drained.
Yes,
so,
but you have your kids.
Back to normal.
Your kids are a parenting win. You and Josie have really. I mean, those guys are great. Do you ever have those moments where you just look at them and go, oh, these guys are so great. Like it takes you by surprise. As parents, you're surrounded by them all the time. And they are marvelous kids.
I have those little epiphanies all the time, and they usually come at the weirdest moments. And they're so full of opinions about everything, and I'm constantly trying to explain to them how things in the world are working or little things that they're not aware of. And they have these really deep insights that catch guard, because, between the some of the silliness and stuff, I realized that a lot of the things that we talk about are really like deeply affecting them, and they're having these big moments. But if you're not paying attention, you miss them.
Right.
And I love it. I love that about them, is that they kind of keep me in the moment and keep me remembering how important it is when you're a young person to have that opportunity to explore and to be silly and to be your full self. So,
and there's such a marvelous lens on the world because they're taking it in. And so as they are seeing the world, they remind us, oh yeah, that does look weird. Oh yeah, it doesn't have to be that way. Oh yeah, their insight into the world is really valuable.
Yeah, considering that the kind of work that we do, it's kind of a cheat code, because it keeps, it's really strange when you're really immersed in writing a project for young readers and stuff, and you'll ask yourself questions like, does this character ring true? Does this really make sense? And then your kid will kick into the room and be like, I know you bought the box of Twinkies for everybody, but I want to eat like 3 of them right now. And be like, oh, okay. And then they kind of snap you back to the reality of what it is to be a young person and their perspective. So that's why I credit my family all the time and all the stuff that I do, because literally they are feeding.
Yeah. My brother and sister-in-law had one of those moments, when your kids are really young and you want to tell a secret to your spouse, and so you just spell the word so that they don't hear it. So they're like outside the grocery store and they're like, okay, when we go in, we should get this and this. And they know if they say certain things, the kids are going to get way too excited. So my sister-in-law says, oh, and maybe we should get some Oreos. And the kids are like, mom, we do know how to spell Oreos. It was like, oh yeah, some things are a little easier to sound out than others.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've gotten to that point now where it's like, especially things like looking at stuff on your phone too, because it's just culturally one of the things that they're used to is that they look over each other's shoulder when they're looking at the phones. So somebody's looking at a meme or something, so they're kind of like absorbed in that. I think of using my phone as a very private,
Right.
experience. So I'm sitting there, I'll like look at my bank account or something like that, and the boys will look over my shoulder and be like, "Yeah, Dad, it looks like we got enough money to buy some Roblox." And I'm like, "What is happening? Why are you
What are
in?"
you?
But they're just aware,
Yeah.
they're constantly aware, and it's beautiful to watch. And I think that raising very aware, very opinionated, very um, understanding of their own identity and agency children is hard, but
Uh-huh.
at the same time, the payoffs are huge. So,
Yes, I had
you know,
one of my friends had a daughter. She's now in college, who was, very stubborn and very opinionated and, very confident. And they were wise enough as parents to recognize that's a good thing in the long run. Like, this is really challenging for us right now because she's not, obedient and docile and that
yeah,
kind of thing. But in the long
yeah,
run, she's going to enter into the world and not be obedient and docile, which is wonderful. And they had to kind of, sometimes, bite their tongues and grit their teeth and go, this is a good trait that you have that we don't want to take away from you. And so I learned a lot about that as a teacher. Like I would be dealing with a kid where, the kid was just like, you know, difficult, defiant
difficult.
at
Yeah,
every turn. And I'd like take the kid out in the hall and go, and all the other kids go, ooh, you're in trouble. And I would take the kid out in the hall and go, these skills that you are demonstrating are gifts. Like, this is a good thing that you are questioning and pushing. And I don't want to take this away from you. I appreciate that you are like this in my class. And the kid would go from like, everything I'm doing is to try and get under your skin to like, oh,
oh,
this person appreciates that I'm trying to get under their skin, and they would kind of be thrown. And then we come back into the class, and the kid would be like, "Oh no, what that just was? That was weird." And the other kids are like, "Wow, whatever he said to her, like, oh my gosh, he's now just like sitting there thinking to herself. He really, And I'm like, no, I told the kid that they were great, and it really is a value.
yeah. And it's beautiful that you've had those experiences, like actively had those experiences in your education background, and you're working with young people and stuff. Because I think that it's a skill that a lot of people have avoided or steered away from because it is difficult.
Yeah.
And I think that culturally we're kind of suffering from that now as a whole, is that the avoidance of things like individuality and creativity and questioning things,
Yeah.
questioning these points of reality that are presented to us, and then they may or may not be actual solid things. They may just be these concepts. And the idea that you can look at those things and evaluate them and be like, does that serve us? Does that serve me?
Yeah.
Is huge,
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people that have kind of like crossed over from that childhood into grown up space and never really challenged themselves or to really challenge those abilities within themselves.
Yeah, well, and I
And then,
saw a lot of that in because you and I are both non-Oregonians who moved to Oregon. And I saw
yeah.
this like really, it was really striking. I had a friend from Chicago and he called it Oregon nice. And that was really helpful to me. I was like, oh yeah, because
Mm-hmm.
like, that habit of avoiding difficult conversations is really deeply ingrained, and it comes across
Mhm.
as kindness in all these different settings. And it's like, oh, everybody's getting along. Yeah,
Yeah,
but they're really uncomfortable having difficult conversations.
yeah,
I had a boss who was like, he said to me, he was like, you come across as really aggressive and you use these really big words. And I said to him, where I'm from, someone's being aggressive when they start using really short words.
yeah, yeah,
Like, I'm not being mean. But I think you're right. Having difficult conversation, we weed that out of kids. Like,
yeah.
yeah,
We do.
some conversations are difficult, they're hard to have, but those are the opportunities, and rather than dodging away from those. And so now I think you're right, we're seeing that in a culture where it's really hard for folks to say, hey, this opinion that you're expressing online, you're somebody
Yeah,
that is a family member, I care about you, and this is a lot more problematic than you think. Let's talk about that. And people just kind of
yeah,
go, oh, let cousin whomever post their right-wing memes. And I'm like, yeah, and then they just kind of bear it. And I'm
exactly.
like, we could have been challenging this stuff for a long time and we avoided hard
Yeah,
talks. And here we are, which is one of the things
yeah,
I want to talk to you about. So I know you have had some challenging conversations lately. And so,
yeah.
without
Oh,
naming
yeah.
names, I don't want to put you on the spot, but what
Yeah.
is it you've
Well,
been kind of dealing with in the world of this fascist
yeah,
uprising that you are living in?
yeah. It's yeah, and yeah, I think you saw some of the ramifications of it on social media and that kind of thing. And it's a weird world that we're living in right now because I'm the type of person, just from the conversation that we've had right now, I like to have deep conversations. I really enjoy, sitting down with somebody and then, cutting it up and then finding out, what are these deeper understandings of things that we may just be kind of living on the surface
Yeah.
of. And it's really great to do this with kids because kids, they don't come with that kind of presupposition of what the world is. They come at it from a very clear and open mindset. But with adults, it's sometimes they're very stuck in kind of a dogmatic kind of cultural idea set that they really don't know how to break away from.
Yeah. Or even
And
dissect and explore. Like,
yeah, or yeah, and yeah, it's that inability to kind of like hold that idea and then have a little physical distance from it and be able to examine it, right?
yep.
And um I very often I get into these kind of like, lengthy conversations with people about this stuff online when I feel like not necessarily want to preach, but also it comes from a place of wanting to understand and to
Yep.
and to be understood. I think every writer is kind of like that. It's like, why do we do this? Why do we force ourselves into the situation when we have to like drag all of these thoughts and feelings out of ourselves and then put it on a piece of paper? Is because we literally want to be understood and to have other people and to understand other people. So I want to have these conversations, but I have found that I keep running into these walls, these walls of this is the way things are, and if you're going to challenge it, you're challenging who I am as a
My
person.
identity. Right.
Yeah. And um I run into this a lot with people that are kind of like deeply ensconced in faith or in a religious setting, or even political identity or any kind of identity. They're very, very set that this is the reality, and you need to adjust your thinking so that you can live in my reality.
I think it was
And
Ezra Klein who coined the term, or maybe he got it from somebody else, of mega identities, not MAGA, mega.
mm,
And one of the things he was pointing out is, even when we were kids, it was very possible, very normal for somebody to live in a small town and
Yeah.
like basketball, and then for
Yeah.
somebody else to live in a big city and like country music. And these
Mhm.
things didn't have to overlap, and the
Yeah.
sorting is such that now it's what he calls identity threat, where somebody goes, oh my gosh, you are saying you don't like NASCAR, therefore
Mhm.
you don't like my religion, because those
Yeah.
things have become so intertwined,
So
and
bundled together.
helping people see, like, hey, your love of football is not a threat to my love of basketball, and it is
Mhm.
also not a part, it doesn't tell you who I'm going to vote for, and and
Yeah.
but these identities, and I think religious communities in particular, not because of the tenets of the faiths themselves, but because of the way the communities operate, meeting on a weekly
Yeah.
basis, and you have
Yeah.
your coffee
And it's
hour, and
not.
everybody around you thinks the same way. It kind of
Yeah.
leads to this sense of, but this is everybody around us, right? We all believe in this. It becomes
Exactly.
common sense, and it's like,
Yeah.
no, 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 that's actually not that's your community.
Yeah, and I find myself falling into sometimes into that same hole of thinking
Sure.
it being like a universal kind of religion, all religious people, and then I realize too now I have to break myself out of that. Is that sometimes it's just people within a particular, even like micro,
Yeah.
you know, community. It's not, and not every faith expression is the same way, and not everybody approaches it the same way. So, this conversation I had with a friend, it was it started off very open, very well, this is what I think, this is where I'm coming from, and then this is where they're coming from, and there's this like really deep friendship that's there. But then at the same time, every time I mentioned anything that I was experiencing, anything that I thought was like, I feel like this is a beautiful growing thing, they were always quick to like correct me or to minimize that thought because it was contrary to the way that they thought.
It was a defense
And
mechanism. I have
yeah,
to protect
and
myself by telling you you're wrong.
exactly. And I don't know if it's just a byproduct of our our experiences with all of the things that are happening right now. There's so much that's happening. I think people as a defense mechanism tend to, kind of bundle these identity things, as a means of like giving themselves a sense of security,
Yeah.
and I find it my training and stuff in trauma informed care and dealing with children who have experienced trauma, it comes out so often now, and I
Yep.
see when I'm talking to adults, I notice things that are trauma responses,
Yep.
and when a kid feels scared or feels insecure, they will lash out because they feel like they need to pull in and secure what is safe. And I
Yeah.
see that in grown-ups, and
Oh yeah.
very often it happens ideologically, where it's like, um, don't challenge this border because this border is safe for me. Things makes things make sense within this
Yeah.
space.
One of the metaphors
So
we used a lot when we did trauma informed care, you may have seen this too, is people would talk about flipping your lid. You heard this? So
yeah,
they actually, explain to you like the structure of the brain, and you've got your cerebral cortex,
yeah,
you've got your ability to make decisions. Your decision making is up front. And then
yeah,
when you are frightened, you kind of go
mm-hmm,
into this heightened mode where you're going, okay, should I go into fight, flight, or freeze? And you've got the cortisol starts pumping. And then once those, you go into fight, flight, or freeze, you cannot be reasoned with. And at
yeah,
that point, then other people, then teachers, parents, the people who care about you, then they see it. Well, now
yeah,
I'm saying to this person, hey, you need to calm down. Too freaking
yeah,
late. Like there's their lid is flipped, and so we would just be able to say to
yeah,
one another as teachers, like, this kid, their lid is flipped. That this is that they're not in a place right now where you can reason with them and talk them down. That's got to come later. First, you just got to make them feel safe, and then
exactly,
you'll be able to talk with them. And I
yeah,
wonder to what extent kind of everyone in the country in the midst of this blitz is already
yeah,
here, that
yeah,
they're right
and
there at that place. And so as soon as they, you say, I like basketball, they're going, not my team. and they're flipped, and there's no more talking because now they're
Exactly.
not in a place to go, oh, that doesn't have to be a threat to me. When I say, oh, country music's not my thing, and the person goes, oh my gosh, and it's like, no, but
Exactly.
I'm not attacking you. I just don't, that's not the kind of music I like, and it doesn't
Yeah.
mean that I hate you. But I
Exactly.
think we're we're
Yeah.
we're
And
close
I
to
love how
that.
you bring up the fact that it's like we don't really notice it until it's here, right?
Then you
Right.
see it,
And yeah, and I feel
or
like
you
we've
don't.
all been kind of simmering in
Yes.
that. I think that the pandemic too, and the
Yes.
isolation and stuff was a big trigger for a lot of people. So I
Yes.
think
Well,
that what we're seeing is like a cultural, expression of that trauma
oh,
now.
absolutely. Well, and one of the things we learn too is, once somebody's flipped, they go into fight, flight, or freeze, and you can like with little kids, it's super obvious, right? Your
Mm.
kindergartner literally runs out the door and like goes
Yeah,
to run into the street or whatever. Like,
yeah,
they are. I
yeah,
mean, but with adults, the ways those manifest are either really obvious. The person gets, starts shouting and they're super defensive and whatever. And you're like, oh, they're in fight. But if they go
uh,
into freeze, especially coming out of the pandemic,
yeah,
it's actually hard to identify because the person just goes, whatever. And they put their head
yeah.
down and you're like, are they tired? Are they
Right.
hungry? No, they're experiencing identity threat. They just respond to it in a different way. And this is not and so that you see this online where the person just like goes silent or becomes really dismissive. And it's
Yeah,
not, they're in freeze because they're freaking out and being able to go,
yeah,
okay, do we need to wait and talk about this later? This is not going to be
yeah,
constructive.
yeah,
I've learned to say to folks online when I kind of start interactions, do you consider yourself at all persuadable on this? And if they say, no, you will never convince me otherwise because this is about my religion or whatever, well,
yeah,
then we can't discuss it. Like until you consider yourself to be persuadable, and I have to come into it too and say, and I am willing to change my mind too. So now we can talk. Oh, but
yeah.
if somebody says to me, I don't think, trans people should have rights, I can say to them, I am not persuadable about that. Like you are not going to convince me that trans people don't have rights. So we can't have a real conversation. you
No,
know,
it's and it's the I think that's the most it's the most like not necessarily disturbing, but it's the thing that most worries me about because so much of this American experiment is about compromise and being able to discuss things and to find a middle ground. And so many people now have kind of gone over into their camps and they're not willing to, you know, open their minds about things. But then at the same time, it does make sense in a lot of ways because some things feel non negotiable,
right?
you know?
I
And
think
it's
it's
like,
legitimate to say this is non-negotiable for me. I think a lot of
yeah,
Americans need to find that line. Like, what
yeah,
is the thing where you'll go, no way, not anymore. I will not tolerate that. Rather than I will tolerate more and more kind of, it's creep, okay, well, maybe trans high schoolers won't be able to play sports. That's not taking away too many rights. Like, no, it's
mhm,
this creep and being able to
yeah,
say, this is a red line for me. I'm sorry,
yeah,
that's not acceptable. At the same
yeah,
time, how do we have that dialogue? And you're right, there's a real
exactly.
tension there.
Well, and it helps you if you can find the things that are are solid. I mean, there is something to be said about being able to find things that you can stand on. Then it does open you up to be like, all right, well, if this is not something that I'm willing to shift on, then where are places that we can
Right.
find common ground? There's a pivot that happens there, and I think that that's the part that we're losing is that people don't have the mental flexibility to be like, okay, well, we're not going to find an inroad here. Well, where is the place that we can find? Where
Right.
can we find common ground? And it's that I think is a manifestation of creativity,
Yes.
right? The ability to be like, oh, I'm hitting these walls. Well, how do I flow around it? You
Yep.
know, how do I find the path? Creativity is all about that. It's about navigating difficult things, making decisions, and finding your way to the goal. And I think that this we're also experiencing right now, not only culturally but worldwide. Um, People have minimized creativity as a human experience, a human skill, something of value for a long time in hopes of pushing productivity,
Yes.
right? And we're seeing the ramifications of that now too, because people don't know how to access that creativity, that imagination that allows you to have that mental flexibility to be like, okay, we've hit a tough spot. How do I navigate myself around it? You know,
Yes.
and that that's a little sad because I think that creativity is the most human expression that we have. It's the closest thing I know for me personally that I get to, transcendence or meeting the oneness of all things is when I'm in a creative space. And I think that when people have minimized it and avoided it, that it diminishes their ability as to be their full human selves.
Yes.
And that's why I've always loved people in the LGBTQ, in the trans community and stuff, because usually the idea of becoming your real self is a real act of creativity,
It
is a real
is.
act of becoming. And
So,
yeah,
the philosopher Soren Kierkegaard, the word we would use now is empathy, but a lot of
yeah,
people don't really think about what that means. And the phrase he used instead was an act of the creative imagination. And I love this because he recognized if you're going to care about another person, it's
yeah,
active for one thing. You have to
yeah,
actually try, and you have to say,
yeah,
I'm going to imagine what it would be like to be feeling what this other person's feeling. And it's inherently an act of the imagination. It is creative. I do not know. I will be wrong, right? I can't know for sure, and yet I
yeah,
can try. And I always told my colleagues, in the language arts department, in the same way that we don't teach kids math so that they'll all become physicists, because most of them won't. We teach them because challenging yourself to solve problems is part of learning to be an adult, right? we
yeah,
teach we don't teach literature so they can answer trivia questions, right? We
yeah,
teach literature because if you can learn to care about a person who never existed, you're practicing learning to care about somebody who really does. And it's
exactly.
empathy practice, right?
It's
It's
empathy practice. Yeah. It's the same way that when you teach somebody how to paint or to draw, it's not so that they can become a commercial artist
right,
or whatever. It's so that they can learn that translating something from here to your hands is hard and
right.
that failing is part of the process.
Yeah.
We don't teach people that, being bad at something is how you grow.
Right.
And I
Well,
think kids,
and
I mean, I
art
see it
is
in kids.
art is this perfect, like the visual arts are this perfect blend of what is happening in a math class and what's happening in a literature class. Because on the
Yeah.
one hand, it's that grit of problem solving, right? I am not
Mhm.
naturally, magically, perfectly Picasso when I start, right? It's going to
Yeah.
be this challenge, and so there's that. There's the
Mhm.
grind of problem solving, but there's also
Yeah,
that I can see the world in a different way. Like
exactly.
I can learn to look not at the shape of the thing, but at the light reflecting off of the thing. Oh, that's a different way of seeing it. Now I'm thinking about shading in a new way, right? And that is
Exactly.
part of that act of the creative imagination. Like, oh, other people
Yeah.
can see the same thing differently. And
Yeah.
getting that's so healthy for connecting with other
Yeah.
humans. But
Oh,
art is part of practicing that.
exactly. I mean, I love this. I love this conversation because it's crazy. Because when I was a kid, I used to, whenever we would do a project in like second or first grade class, um, they would give us all the crayons, and I colored all my skies purple. And it's because I didn't know at the time. I'm blue red colorblind,
I have a
So,
little bit of that. For me, it's just the shade of blue and purple construction paper. I can't tell the difference. They're too close.
see,
It's that close,
yeah. But my teacher would always call it out and be like, Brian, skies are blue. I don't know
Got it
why you keep
wrong.
doing it. Yeah, and she was a very kind lady, but she would talk to my mother about it. She'd be like, I don't know why he keeps doing this, but it made me realize even at an early age that not everybody sees the world the way that I
Exactly.
do, you
Yeah.
know? And I mean, not only physically, but maybe it's something bigger than that, and that's always stayed with me,
Well, and that's
and
that then creative imagination. How can I extend beyond blue and purple to,
yeah,
other people could see the world differently in other ways, right? And I think your work in particular, where you blend the visual arts and the writing, is so fantastic because your practice is you are creating the illustrations and the text. And so you're thinking about these characters, and visualizing these characters, and that I love the way that manifests in your work. Like that's your characters better than even somebody like me who just works with text, because you went through the grind of figuring out, okay, but it's not just what do they look like I think most authors have a sense of, oh, this is what my characters look like, but how
yeah,
can I translate that to the page, which is a different exercise, right?
yeah. And once again, like you were talking about, that these these experiences with literature, with art, even with philosophy or, religious practices and stuff like that, it changes the way that you visualize and how you construct stories. So when I'm drawing a picture, I'm not only drawing what I think is a cool picture, I'm thinking about all the little details and stuff like, oh, he's got a pouch on his belt. What's in that pouch, and what side of the belt does he wear that on? Um, I had this one problem with Nicholas where I was thinking about, because I know about the time period that he's born in, and he goes into a place that's very snowy, and he started in a place that was Mediterranean. So I worried about shoes.
Yeah.
I worried about shoes on a very specific level. I was like, is he wearing sandals? Are there leather boots in this time period? It actually bothered me for a long time. And then it came out in the story, like he had to, when he got to this new place, he had to change the clothes that he wore.
Right.
He had to wear something that was something that was different than what he was used to. And I think that level of thinking helps you to be more specific in your creative practices too, is because you've asked yourself these questions, and you've embodied this thing for a moment. So
Right.
yeah,
Well,
the,
and
the,
that's
the
also
drawing
a
becomes,
particularly important insight when you're dealing with stuff that's going to be read by kids, because
yeah,
there's a kid out there who, if you hadn't thought of that, if you're going as an adult, the story doesn't require a description of the clothing. I'm moving on. There's a kid out there who's like, but I would have to change. The thing I hate about winter is putting on my coat. Like that kid would be so fixated on that. And so the fact that
yeah,
you thought of, hey, one of the things my reader is going to be concerned about is what is he wearing now that the weather's
yeah,
different, is going to benefit that reader who's like, they're a young person, and therefore clothes are, a big part of their day.
big part of their day. And those little details and stuff, I think that it makes it more immersive, but it also, it makes me enjoy the process even more. I mean, I get a lot out of seeing other people's creative practice too, and in particular film, um, because there's a visual language there that I think can be informative to the writing process. Because
Yeah.
if a little thing is done without dialogue, without description, then and it rings true to you. I mean, that's something that you can kind of hold on to and take into your practice. I I love the work of Hayao Miyazaki for a Studio Ghibli movie.
Oh yeah.
Um, there's so many little touches in there that just make the characters come to life. There's this part in Spirited Away where the main character Chihiro is like putting on her shoes after, I mean, because she goes into this like magical bathhouse with all these spirits and stuff. She has to take her shoes off. But then when she's leaving again to go on another like side quest, another part of the adventure, she has to put her shoes back on. And she does this little thing when she puts her shoes on and she taps her toe to like make sure that her toe goes all the way in to the shoe. And that little moment, there's no dialogue, it's not part of the story. It's just there. And it totally like grounds you. It's like, oh, this is a real character. This is a kid. This is something that she does all the time. When she's putting her shoes on,
Yep.
she taps her toe to make sure that her foot is all the way in. And those little details are informative of who the person is.
Yes.
And I think that, when you're dealing with people on a day-to-day basis, noticing those details sometimes is more informative of who they are, where they've come from, than any of the things that they say. You know?
Oh yeah. One of my favorite directors is David Fincher, and somebody's created a supercut of this. In a lot of his films, he shows the people getting ready to go to work before they leave on whatever adventure, so that you see what do they do. And the one that focuses on this the most is Seven, where you see the two different police officers who are very different men and how they get ready for their day. And one of them goes through and very carefully picks out his tie. It is not yet made. He then takes the time to tie his tie. And then the other has it pre-tied, and it's just one that he grabs and yanks and pulls on. And it's such a subtle detail, but it's like, I know these guys. I know something deep about them by the way that they decide to, not even how they tie their tie, whether or not they will tie their tie today. Like one of them is, and so it's, those little details tell us a lot about who these people are.
It does. And it informs your creative process too, because you notice it. And being aware and noticing these things, once again, it's an act of creativity. It changes the way that you see the world and how you absorb the world. And I think it's imperative, and it's imperative to encourage it and to teach it to people on a regular basis, because if not, then they're just kind of taking the world around them as presented to them, as surface.
Well, and I wanted to ask you about that. So are you teaching right now? Do you have a class that you're teaching at Portland State currently?
Not right now. I teach in the fall, and then I write in the winter, or vice versa.
Yeah.
And there has been some weird shifts at Portland State. I don't know what my path forward right now is going to look like in the come fall again, but I've been encouraged that that the classes that I have been teaching have been really well received. Right now I'm just writing.
Well, and the reason I ask, I have been very curious, now having left the classroom just before inauguration day, essentially, how are students handling this? And I've been talking, my son's in college, and so we've been talking about it, and it's interesting because he talked about, on the one hand, students are trying to focus, right? So they're going, okay, I'm going to try and put that stuff aside. But then he was saying, he's got a student in the room who is worried about whether or not she or her family will be deported. How is that kid supposed to focus in the same way that somebody like my son, who's got a lot of privilege, right? How's he gonna, he's going, okay, and he's an incredibly empathetic person. And so he's going, I need to feel this. In fact, he can't help it. He just, is like, I am worried about this kid around, this person near me, because I know she is far more nervous than I am. And so I thought about
your
how
kid is an empathetic person.
Shocking, right? Yeah, he really is more empathetic than I am. He's very, very sensitive to other people's feelings around him, which I admire about him. And so he'll notice, he's just good at noticing. And he's like, and even then, when we were talking about it, he was like, it took me by surprise. I hadn't considered how frightening this was to her. She is in a very different place than I am. And I've wondered about, in a class like yours, where in your courses, where you are focused so much on what can we create? How can we get into that creative headspace? I
Yeah.
wonder. I mean, I guess as a creative yourself,
Yeah.
how have you felt this getting in, in the way, or have you felt that your own writing has been a reprieve? How have you been handling this as the world has been
Yeah.
bombarding you?
I mean, like, it's a really good question because I was feeling it as the semester went on, um, moving into Christmas as well, like because it was right after the election, and then I think right after the election, a lot of people were dealing with it in a very visceral, very emotional way because a lot of what the feeling was is what is going to happen.
Right.
Is it going to be worst case scenario? What? Because the rhetoric had been very, very frightening, leading up to it. And I find like most of the time in most creative spaces, and even as an educator, my job more often than not is to be an encouragement, because there's so many other things, there's so many other factors out there in the world that are working against you in your creative practice that I don't need to be sitting here, giving you a hard time about it. I need to be sitting here encouraging you and reminding you that it's important. So in my class, very often we were trying to find bright spots. Where can your creative practice, where can your work lead to something good, some positive change, and also exploring why not only trying to be, talk about, bright and beautiful things, but also talking about those dark, hard things, how that is transformative too. So I think that at that point, I was just trying to set them up for some level of creative success on the other side of this, because I very often, because I teach publishing for writers, I let them know that if you came in here trying to figure out a cheat code on how to be successful as a publisher or as a writer, this is not your class.
Right.
I mean, because I'm like, it's funny that they got a guy like me to teach this because I think I can say pretty successful as a creative, but my ideas of success have changed significantly since starting this,
Yes.
So,
Yes.
Do I make great work? Yes. Do I find a good audience? Yes. Does my work resonate with the people that receive it? Yes. Am I rich?
Right.
Not at all.
Right. Yes.
Do I
Yeah.
have a nice car? No,
Yeah.
no.
Yep.
So,
That's I think people's perception of creatives and our finances is compromised by two things. One, as a society, we're really bad about talking openly about our money, and
yeah.
for part of that is living in a capitalist society, it benefits the very wealthy to discourage all the rest of us from ever talking about wages and that kind of thing. But also, it's considered gauche, right? It's considered we don't want to talk about our money, and so we don't. And then the other thing that skews it is we only see, or the most prominent are also the wealthiest, right? And so we're going, oh, when I think of writers, I'm thinking of Stephen King. And we're not thinking Stephen King is vanishingly rare. Like that is not what most writers experience. And so I even had this experience where a relative of mine, I found out after the fact, like secondhand, was like, I secretly have resented for years that Ben isn't flying us out to see him and taking us on vacations and renting a car because he's so wealthy from all his books. And when I tell this to writers, they're just like, what? Like I lose money some years being a writer. Like like it is not but I think you're right. That process of changing our definition of success is really important, because we all go into it going, wouldn't it be cool if I was, if I hit the lotto? And there's nothing wrong with that inherently. Like as you're
You
writing the
know?
book, going, I stunt cast it. Like, wouldn't this star be in the movie? And that would be cool. Like that's, the number of books that are then made into movies is infinitesimally small. Like the percentage is
Yeah.
so tiny, but we do that, and that's not bad. But then learning,
Yeah.
oh no, I connected with this one reader in this really deep way, that's actually really rewarding. That's,
It is. I mean, and sometimes it. I mean, I can imagine how that would feel exponentially with a whole bunch of people liking what you're doing, but that only becomes numbers. It only becomes this kind of abstract thought when it's real. It's the person that's right in front of you is like, I really need to know when the next one's coming out because I love
right.
this so much. That I mean that reality is so palpable. It's so real. It's something that you can carry with you. So yeah, very often that's the thing that I'm reminding these students of is that um, if you're coming into this with the expectation of getting like that J.K. Rowling money, then you might have to shift your expectations because if you hold those high expectations for yourself, it's good to have aspirations. Aspirations are always good. Expectations, not so much. Any creative practice where you go in there with like strict expectations, very often the finished product never
Is
lives up to what you thought it was going to
Oh
be.
yeah. Well, that was
Yeah,
for me. Like after writing a few novels,
yeah,
you learn just like in visual art, you learn like not only this is my style, but these are my limitations. Right? I am not particularly good at this. I can certainly work at it and I can improve, but like okay. And so my novel "Don't Read This Book" came about because I had an idea for a book and
uh-huh.
knew I couldn't write it. And so I wrote a book about the person who could write it. It was a total cheat. It was I'm going to write a book about the writer of that book because she's better than I am. I couldn't write that book.
Yeah, it's like
So that
like
was that
Jack
was a
Black.
fun end run. Because
Yeah,
you
it's like
just learn
Jack
like I
Black's
can't write
song.
that book.
This is the song
Yes,
about the greatest song in the
exactly.
world.
Yes,
Yeah,
that was my homage to the
I, I
the
love it.
greatest
I
book in the
love it.
world. Exactly.
But I mean, what we were talking about this a moment ago. Creativity is that ability to be like, oh, here's that boundary, that block. How do I find a way around it?
Yeah.
And I love that. I love that. And I'm very much the same way. I sometimes I think that my level of description um, of the characters and their who they are and stuff doesn't ever live up to the image in my head. So I draw the pictures sometimes as supplement because I'm like, okay, this is kind of what I was going for, you know. So I don't know, and a lot of times that's really what it boils down to is especially when you're talking to young creatives is teaching them that the practice, the act of doing the thing, and all of the stuff that comes along with it, that's the art. That's the art. The art is in the action.
Yep.
The art is very present and in the moment. The finished product is just like an artifact of
Yeah.
the act of doing it. It's proof that creativity happened. And hopefully when somebody else experiences the artifact of your creative process, it sparks joy. It sparks some acknowledgement of humanity, something good in the person that's experiencing it. But to not hold on to what are these you know that this thing has to be this one thing and it has to be perfect each time. um a lot of the strange experience of teaching during that post election malaise, or depression that happened was that it was also happening at the same time as some of the advent of some some AI technology that was coming about, which was also making a lot of the students very nervous about prospects of their creative futures. And
Yeah.
when you're a student, a lot of times you're thinking about, how am I going to be successful? How am I going to feed myself? How am I going to, achieve this, dream of success? And when something like that, something that pivotal and altering of the strata of creativity happens while you're
Uh-huh.
learning, it's very nerve wracking. It's very like, oh my God, do I need to figure out something else?
Yeah.
And just making sure to explain to them that their creative expression, you know, minus this idea of like high productivity that comes from something like an AI software, that their personal creative expression is unique and needed
Yeah.
in the world.
Hadn't thought of
So,
that because it's I've been to conferences as a writer who's middle aged, and people are freaking out about AI, but I hadn't thought of what does this look like to a young writer, and that is, you're right, it's a different kind of fear, like,
yeah,
oh, because I think this point we're at, this inflection point, is really about market more than it's about art.
yeah,
This is like what it would be like if you were a musician at the advent of Napster, and
yeah,
and
hmm,
so you looked at the model in the 80s, and it was, oh, you get a big recording contract from a big producer, and then you are selling out arenas and you are
yeah,
successful, right, because of your album sales. And
yeah,
suddenly shifting to, no, people are just going to steal your music when it's online, or you're going to get paid, tiny fractions of a penny by Spotify. You're going to make your
yeah,
money doing live performances. Like, the art actually hasn't changed as dramatically as the market, right? You're still going
yeah,
to try and write and perform great songs, right? But the way that you're going to convey those to people is going to be different. And I think that's where kind of we are, is people are going to go, okay, I need to form a connection with you, Brian, because I care about you, because you're not AI, right?
yeah,
And you are
yeah,
what makes a difference. But the work itself is the work you were always doing. It's just the
exactly.
market now demands that we be far more present. You can't be the author of the 1950s who like was a recluse,
Yeah.
like, because the recluse could be AI now,
He
right?
never does signings. Oh my God.
Yeah, and I think that's hard for especially older authors. A lot of
Yeah,
the authors I work with who are my age and older are like, I just want to write. I don't want to be involved in marketing. And I'm like,
yeah,
marketing is how you distinguish yourself from the AI. You are an
exactly.
individual. You have to let folks know you're a person now, and that's a
Yeah,
part of the mark. But the work itself is the book's still the book. You've just got to be present so they care about the person who made the book in a way that people didn't,
exactly.
100 years
Yeah,
ago.
yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head, really, which was, because you think with a younger audience, college students that are kind of getting into this, that they would be a lot more, savvy with navigating social media and having actual presence out there in the world, and being visible and that kind of thing with their work. Um, Creatives, I think, just as a whole across the gambit, they tend to like, it takes something big to kind of get them into that space of like, okay, well, I have to physically be out there.
Yeah.
um, I always take a lot of enjoyment of reading biographies of musicians, and the anxiety that they felt before going on stage and being this visible person. Um, I'm a big fan of Bowie. I'm a big fan of Prince, and they both experience like really strong, kind of sometimes revulsion about wanting to go out in front of people. So they adopted these identities that
Yes.
allowed them to kind of like be out there and express themselves. And um, so yeah, I think the creatives across the board have always kind of been like, I just want to do the work. I don't want to go out
Yeah.
there. And that's kind of beautiful, the fact that we all kind of share that.
Yeah.
But yeah, sometimes it's just, even with young people right now, is to encourage them that, yeah, your voice is important. You know,
Yeah.
who you are, your identity as a person affects the reading of your work, you know. And I think that we're seeing that in very, very real, like in real time ways right now with certain people that I was
Mm-hmm.
very huge fans of, and just
Oh,
seeing
I
the
think we're thinking of the same guy from England but lives in Minnesota or something. Yeah, yes. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah, fandom, yeah, yeah,
absolutely. Where, you're just watching these people destroy their legacies in ways that we never held authors accountable for that in the 1800s because nobody
yeah,
knew,
yeah,
that kind of horrible behavior was also more socially acceptable. But
and
like
yeah,
now
yeah,
we're going,
and
I need to know you and care about you and have a connection with you. And when I find out about your awful behavior, it's hard for me to read your books. Like that's,
exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. And I mean, and the work will exist, though. The work will continue to exist in libraries, in bookstores, and it will it will change. It
yeah,
changes the experience of it, you know. I totally believe and support the people that came out against certain
mm-hmm.
writers, and everything that's happening to them they had coming to
Yep,
them. And I've had to kind of deal with that reality of how do I experience the work now on the
yeah,
other side of them.
yep.
And a creative person has the ability to examine that experience and to take something out of it. You know, that once
And to,
again,
yeah, to parse it, right, to go, oh,
yeah,
I can recognize this
yeah,
person has a really admirable ability to do X in their writing,
yeah,
and ew, now that I know this, how is that manifesting in their writing? And I
yeah,
can hold those things in tension and like now read it and go, oh yeah, there is this stuff in the writing that I didn't see was there before. But Hemingway is a
there,
great example of that, where I can read
yeah,
Hemingway and go, Hemingway is genius. Like the guy
yeah,
is a brilliant writer. He was a jerk. He was not a kind person. He was not good to the people around him. Like,
yeah,
and
yeah,
be able to read him and go, oh yeah, and the jerk is here on the page too, and the
yeah,
genius, right? And
and
I
the
can,
genius.
but you'll get a kick out of this. There was a time I was going to get a quote by an author as a tattoo, and I
Mhm.
was hesitant, and I, was like, okay, mate, and then sure enough, the person went out on a limb to defend a friend, and it was the wrong friend and the wrong hot take. And I was very glad I did not have that tattoo. And so I have made a principled decision that from now on, if I ever get a quote by a human being on my body, it will be someone who is deceased. Like,
Yeah,
so they can't.
it's like
So I'm like, I've got an Octavia
it's
Butler
blocked
quote that I
in
would
now.
love to get because I know Octavia Butler is not going to turn around and say something tomorrow that makes me regret it.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, it's a pretty secure bet there. You know,
Wait till they're
I've
safely
I've been
dead.
playing with an idea of getting a Maurice Sendak, character, tattooed on me. And I'm like, that's that's pretty safe. It's
Yep,
pretty
that's
safe.
safe. You're not going to have a Me Too moment about him next week,
No,
whereas, like,
not at all. Not at all.
I am a huge fan of the work of Sherman Alexie, and hearing about, his behavior was so disappointing because it
Oh
was,
yeah,
if folks don't know the story, I won't rehash it all, but, this was somebody who was attacking women in the community that he had represented so well
yeah,
using his position in the community, like saying, hey, if
yeah.
you want to be an important voice in this community that I have been a figurehead of to some extent, then you will do the following for me. It was really
Hmm.
gross, right? and
Yeah,
and learning that was so disappointing, and so it absolutely has affected my ability to engage with his work. At the same time, it is marvelous, like, and
yeah,
so yeah, that
yeah,
that tension's very
yeah.
real.
And I think that a lot of people are kind of dealing with the ramifications of that right now, but they don't have the mental flexibility to re-engage
Yeah,
with the realities, And I'm dealing with that too. I'm dealing with that too. I'm a huge Harry Potter J.K.
yep,
Rowling fan. I love her books, but I do not in any way support the way that she speaks to the trans community. And I've had to really buckle down and figure out how am I going to navigate those emotions and the experience of that work that I loved while not supporting this outlashing at a community that I connect with and I truly empathize with. And
Yeah.
you
Well,
know,
and I wonder if you had this experience that I did too about, with her, where it was after all of her revealing of herself as the the most muggle of muggles, right? That then I was able to go, oh, and maybe it was just exposure, but then I heard a lot of different communities pointing out the racism that was in the books that I hadn't seen. Like, because I'm of Jewish descent, I saw the anti-Semitism, right? But I didn't
yeah.
see the anti-Asian bias. I didn't see the because I didn't know well enough to go, oh yeah, that really is problematic. Like, and then these voices are like, here are some other things you might want to notice in her work, and I'm like, oh yeah. So I'm so grateful that people said it's not just that she's anti-trans. Do you know what was in there before? And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, that I
Yeah.
was too ignorant to see. Like, that's helpful,
You know, and it's the crazy thing about art is that it no matter what biases you bring into it, very often the thing that you create, it still it still stands as an artifact of a human experience, right? When I see, I got the wonderful opportunity a year and a half ago to go to the Museum of African American History in Washington, D.C., when my family was there getting our foster parent award or foster
Yeah.
family award. And I got a chance to see so many artifacts of my history. And it's funny to see that stuff kind of like, held in a space where you think of things inside of a museum as being kind of it's reverential. It's like it's in a space that's being held at some level of reverence. But a lot of it were things that were just kind of horrible, was just kind of like demeaning. And I'm sitting there experiencing it, and I realize I can see the value of a thing, of a created thing, despite all of the history and all of the darkness that came with it. And that, as a person who makes things for a living, is it's kind of a transcendent moment. So when
Yeah.
you realize that darkness and and inhumanness, doesn't last. It's not a permanent stain, and that the object moves on in history and in time, and sometimes it has the scars of that, but it is not always totally captured and stuck in that moment, you know. I think about, I mean, music is a really great example of this. Is that I think about all the really amazing music that came out of just the pure sadness and you know, being socially ostracized and being kind of demeaned of the African American community, but at the same time, the music
And
is
how much of that
full of
music is hopeful. Like,
it's
you
hopeful,
listen to
you know?
gospel and blues, and there's this like, blues are freaking fun. Like, they're
Yeah,
designed to be fun, and gospel is
yeah,
hopeful and uplifting and comes from a place
yeah,
of so much pain, right? And
yeah.
I think that's important. I need to like sit with that and ponder that, because you're absolutely right. There's something I need to think about the way that you said when we create something, it becomes an artifact immediately of the fact that the creativity has already happened.
Yeah.
You're right. There is something comforting in knowing that artifact, as it kind of passes through time, becomes symbolic of the creation and not necessarily all the horror. Like it carries it, but it doesn't have to
Yeah,
be all about it. Like that's
it's not all about it. Yeah, and it has the fingerprint of the creator, but it's not always necessarily purely just the creator. I I reference again music because I mentioned um, blues and jazz and how so much of it comes from inspiration from other art forms and other musics as well. Um, when I was a kid, I was exposed to a lot of classical too, and I particularly gravitated towards Wagner,
mm,
and because it was so heavy and
yeah,
so
powerful.
powerful, and it came from this place of like, it felt like I was walking through a dark forest that was filled with, creatures and magical beings. It took me, it transported me to another place. And then, you do the research and then you
Uh-huh.
find out, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
I see where that's coming from. But, you know, the experience that I had is mine.
Right.
It's mine.
And the
The
magic
act of
is still there in the music. Like that's the
it
cool
is.
thing, is that kind of mystical, magical, transformative, transporting experience is still
Yeah,
there. And you learn
yeah,
about the kind of horrible side, and you
yeah,
go, okay, that exists, and I need to hold that and acknowledge that that's real, and I won't dismiss it. And at the same
yeah.
time, that magic is still in there. Like,
It
and
is.
oh, that's yeah,
It
that's
is. And I realize that when I make a thing and I make a book, as much intention that goes into making the thing. When I hand it to somebody, it's not mine anymore.
this is huge. This is
Yeah,
such an important point that
yeah,
I talk about the metaphor I use is a negotiation. So when you're in a real formal negotiation, right, you write up like, this is what our side demands, and you pass it across to management, and then you've passed it across to management. Like it's theirs now.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
And then they go, well, this is what we think we can actually afford. And they pass it across to you. Right. And
yeah,
I think the work we do is very much that kind of negotiation where it's, I get to have this interaction with this world and with these people, and I own it, right? And but once it's out in the world, I have passed it across the table, and now you get to have an experience with that, which is yours. It is distinct, and then maybe we'll be really lucky, and you'll reach out to me, and you'll say, "I hated this about your book," or whatever, and we can now negotiate, right? But at no point
yeah,
do I get to say your experience of that book is wrong, because it really
yeah.
is yours. Like you had to, and all I got to do was give you something to work with. And so that's my interaction with it, is I was the one who gave you the thing that you then interacted with. But beyond that, what you did with it belongs to you. And
Yeah.
I think that's hard for us as writers. We're like, no, that's not what that character looks like. No, that is what the character looks like in the movie in their head. And they're right because they own it.
Yeah.
Like,
And there's a beauty to it, really, is because it feels like that it's like you started your story, your work is a spark, and sparks spread. Sometimes in amazing, beautiful ways, and sometimes not so great.
yeah.
But at the same time, it's that act of that spark kind of moving past you,
Yes.
beyond you, which is a beautiful thing. I write with a whole lot of themes in mind, and there are ones that are more important to me than others. But I am always surprised when somebody comes back to me and they saw a theme in there that I didn't know
Yes.
I was putting in there. But that became their point of reference in the story. That became the thing that they latched onto, and it became the most important part to them. And I'm like, I want to take credit for it,
Right.
but sometimes I realize that that's their creative experience too. They're applying that to the reading.
Yes, but
So I'm like,
you may have
I
had
was
this
there.
experience. Another mutual friend of ours, Kate Ristow, certainly had this experience where people came back to her and said, "This particular character in your book was my favorite, and that was not the protagonist of the first book, right?" And they were like, "We love Hennessy in Shadow Girl. You need to,"
Yeah,
and she took that in, and she let that affect the series. So the next book was back and forth between those two characters, and the third book was like really Hennessy's. Well, no, I
Yeah.
didn't. By then it was both, you know. But she shifted the focus based on the feedback, and I'd never been able to have that experience before because I'd always written one-offs, right? And so
Yeah.
now I'm in the process of writing the third book of this trilogy. But there was a character in the first one who I thought would never reappear. Like he was there, he was funny, and that was that, you know. And there were people who were like, he was my favorite part. And I was like, okay, he has to be in every book now. He's freaking hilarious. People love this guy. Like he keeps coming back, you know? And so I
Yeah.
love when that's that return of the negotiation, right? I push it across the table. It's yours. You can do with it what you want. But if I'm lucky enough to get some feedback, then I can
Yeah.
use that in the future and learn from that and go, oh yeah, I got to keep the King of Trolls. He's hilarious. People love the King of Trolls. You know, like
I love that. I love that. I'm totally gonna hold on to that idea of the negotiation because that's beautiful. That is beautiful because yeah, there are those wonderful moments where you're interacting with people who have read your work and they come back and they highlight to you things that you didn't even know were important while you were writing it. You know, um,
I had a beta
in my
reader.
show, yeah,
I had a
in my
beta reader
story,
tell me
there's
what
one
one of my
character.
books meant and totally change it. So this was early in my career, and
Yeah,
I had a theme in mind, but I hadn't really thought like, you know. And she was like, "This is your theme," and I was like, and you know, this is a language arts teacher. She was real good at
yeah.
picking out like the main theme for, you know. And I was like, oh, I need to go back. So, Wendy Kirsch, if you're listening, thank you so much for totally changing that book because she realized what it was really about. And
Yeah.
I had to
Oh
dial that
man.
up, you know?
Oh my God. Editors, man. You know, editors.
Oh, yeah.
They
Yes.
really do help the thing shine. But yeah, I mean, um, so I'm in the middle of writing. Well, in the middle, towards the end of writing Nicholas book three,
Yeah.
and anybody that's please read the Nicholas books. I
Yes.
love the Nicholas books.
Yes.
They're awesome for me. Um, so my three main characters are Nicholas, who will eventually be Santa Claus, um, Krampus, who is will be Krampus, you know, and Sabina, who is Mrs. Claus, but also, well, you're living in a part of the world now where you get to experience these um, Christmas traditions, but she is also called La Befana, which is the Christmas witch, and part of the reason why I bring it up is that so much of the story at the beginning was about me trying to bring Nicholas to that point where you realize that he's fully fleshed out as Santa Claus. But as my readers came back, they asked me more questions about, well, Krampus. I've seen what Krampus looks like. How does Krampus get to that point? He's so nice right now, or is Sabina just Mrs. Claus? I mean, what happens to her? And I realized that there are no real background characters. That it is a a cast, and I'm trying to tell the story of the cast, even though it's called the Epic of Nicholas the Maker. It's about all of these characters and how do they get to this point where they are these characters that from legend. And that really informed this new book because
Yeah.
for the first time, the perspectives split like halfway, about the third of the way through the story. So you're not only just following Nicholas on his adventure, you're following Sabina and Krampus on their quest too. And eventually the stories come back around to meet each
Yeah.
other. And that came from just talking to readers,
Yep.
like, oh my God, that character has some resonance to them. And I'm like, oh, I got to really dig in on that.
Yeah.
So
Well, and
very
I
much
think that division is so great in a story because that response we have when we're like, don't go up those stairs or don't keep telling this person this lie, just tell them. And so we're like super invested in the story because we're like yelling at the page, like if you would just tell them, right? I think the same thing happens, and this is very much like a D&D kind of thing. When the characters separate, we're like, don't divide the party. Like, stay together. And then they go off in their separate directions. And we're like, that's bad. They should have stayed in the same place.
It's always scary, right?
Right?
Because you know that when they're together, their collective abilities and stuff will serve them. But then when they're split, then suddenly the danger feels that much more real, because the fighter went the other way.
Yes.
All you have left is the mage and the healer. I mean, what the hell are you going to do with that? So yeah, it's and I think that's the reason why people do it in stories, is just to up the ante.
Yes.
It's like, oh, they can't help each other now. What the hell's going to happen?
Well, I could not have possibly asked for a better transition than this. So we'll go to our commercial break real quick. But when we come back, I want to do something I've never done on this show before. I want to do a collaborative storytelling, and I need your input to tell this story. And the story is about exactly what we've been talking about. It's about taking a character and putting her off on her own to create that fear. So I think I'm folks who know Brian's work know, and taken classes and stuff from him, know if you're going to be doing world building, Brian is the guy you go to. And so I really wanted to start this with you, because you will be key in this story, and I think you're going to get a kick out of it. So folks, when we come back, Brian and I are going to tell you a story together. Hey, readers and reviewers. I want to put out an all call for guests who are fighting back against fascism. If you know an author or artist of any kind who is using their art or their platform to push back, especially if they are doing so in an interesting way that deserves more attention and support, share this show with them and encourage them to email NotAPipePublishing at NotAPipePublishing@gmail.com, and we'll get them scheduled. And if you're looking for inspiring or practical ways you can push back, be sure to subscribe to the show so you catch all the great guests folks are going to recommend. See you here each week. Want to read a paranormal romance unlike any other? Love horses, monsters, and wry laugh-out-loud humor? Then Sparks is the book for you. Rosie wants to tear down the old cowshed on her ranch, but the old-timers tell her not to because it's unlucky. Boy, howdy is it ever. Rosie's new world is magic. Her boyfriend talks to animals, the demon under the barn is deadly and requires a cow for company. Rosie has to save her ranch, her love, and even her dog as she negotiates an unbelievable magical world. Romance, monsters, and magic for grown-ups? Yes, please. Check out Sparks by Maren Bradley Anderson.
You deserve a vacation.
How about a trip to a dude ranch on a colony planet?
Or a journey to a universe where wizards call lightning down from the sky and calm rumbling volcanoes?
Or a holiday tour of the major cities of Europe with vampires and werewolves and witches as guides.
Or maybe just a nice hot sudsy bath with a book of poetry that will make you cry and sigh and laugh.
We've got you covered.
A paperback will appear on your doorstep each month to whisk you away, and you'll return refreshed, enlightened, and ready to make the world we share a brighter place for everyone.
Or if you prefer, you can sign up for a quarterly subscription and get 4 YA titles, 4 adult titles, or 4 collections of poetry per year.
Plus, you'll get book club questions from the author before you start the book, and an interview with the author afterwards.
So, if you are in a book group or want to start one, this is everything you need in a kit. Will we occasionally throw in some extra surprises just to say thank you to our members? Of course.
You can also give someone their very own membership with all of the rights and privileges pertaining thereto.
So, find a reward level that's right for you.
And share this with your friends.
Join the Indulge Your Shelf book club today. Your bookshelves deserve a little pampering. I'm so excited about this. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I am here with Brian Parker, and we are going to try our hand at a little bit of collaborative storytelling. So since this is the first time, I need to give Brian the lore, the kind of background of this world. So this is this fantasy novel that I'm just starting. And so this is set in the world of Vromia. It's a fantasy world, quite different from ours, though listeners may see some interesting connections if they listen hard. One way Vromia is very different from Earth is that there are a number of sentient species, all considered people if they can speak, use tools, and manipulate the magic of the world in some way. But they all do so differently, and most species feel their own way is superior, and the other species are lesser for not using their language, their tools, their magic. Most of our characters are what are called stone skins. The species who appear the most human, they're bipedal, they have 2 arms, 2 legs, and they're the most populous of the speaking people on the land. Though there may be more of the deep folk underground, or the merfolk, or the amphibious stationae living under the oceans, the stone skins don't really know how many of them exist, and they don't feel that they're that important since the stone skins rule the land, and therefore they think that's the most important. And according to the scriptures of the Temple of Light, the Stoneskins once lived on the smaller continent on the far side of Vromia in a civilization that was a paradise of art, culture, wealth, but no magic. Then, at the time of the recreation, the gods abandoned the world, unleashing the terrors, the monsters that come out at night, but also blessing the world with magic as a compensation. And the Stoneskins left the smaller continent, forgetting its name, so it is now known only as the Cursed Land. No speaking people can live there or even explore it because it's so infested with terrors. The stone people traveled first to the newly formed islands around the smaller continent, known as the Broken Isles, and built primitive, traditional societies mostly concerned with fishing and agriculture. But as they made their way east and west around the world, they conquered the larger continent. And there, on the Great Plains of Droofs, they built the Imperium. And at its heart, the capital city of Isabilkar. Of course, no one remembers how the city got that name or what it means, and few people call it by that name. It is known as the City of Smoke, because the smoke of the magic mages rises through the great tower structure to the imperial court at the top, and then it drifts out over the plains and it blesses anyone who lives downwind, visible from 1,000,000 imperial wheels away. Now, the Imperium is under attack. The younger kingdoms of Agastra and Kradesh to the south, Kambamis and Zimdor to the east, Aralak to the west, and Igafel and Yondak to the north have all been sending their barbarian armies further and further into the Imperium lands, expanding their smaller kingdoms while the Imperium is shrinking. And the people who live in the City of Smoke, they don't know much about these foreign invaders. They aren't even sure if the barbarians are truly Stoneskins or some lesser variant. But the rumor is that they are all hideously ugly and they're filled with bloodlust and greed for imperial lands and wealth. And maybe they're even related to the terrors that roam the landscape at night, even on the greater continent. Or perhaps the barbarians have been infected by them or are in league with them in some way. The people of the Imperium live in fear of this external threat, and many of the peasants from the edges of the Imperium have been forced to travel to the City of Smoke for refuge, straining the capital city further. And the novel that I'm writing is going to take place there in that city, but not the story that Brian and I are going to tell. This one is called The Side Quest. It's the story of an 11-year-old girl named Zil Naroth, and I'll tell readers now where I got that name. I have a guest next week, Liz Prado, and I had a guest last week, T. Thorn Coyle. So I just flipped both their names. So this is Zil Naroth, who lives on the southern edge of the empire, near the border to Kradesh, in a dying little town called Gersi. And her father had been conscripted to fight for the Imperium against the invading barbarians, and Zil must make her way across the Great Plains of Droofst to one of the last coastal cities still under Imperial control, so past the City of Smoke, all the way to the other side of the kingdom, the city of Omario, so she can go live with her grandmother, Yelmis, and her favorite aunt. And her favorite aunt is a very famous mage herself, Strafres. But Zil doesn't even know how to begin such a journey. So I'm going to need Brian's help, and then I will keep coming back with every author to figure out how is Zil going to make her way across the continent. So Brian, thanks to you, we can set the scene a little bit. So Gersi is a farming town where most people grow grains and raise herds of gowdle. They're a cross between goats and cows. Gowdle for meat only. They have reptilian exteriors, and so they have scale leather. And the people there sell the scale leather and the meat to the capital and keep what they need as well. And Zill wasn't completely abandoned when her father was conscripted. She was left in somebody's care, but I'm not sure whose. Who did Zill get left with when her father was forced to go off and join the army?
Okay. All right. So, the town again is
Guernsey, Ghirsi, Guernsey.
Guernsey. Okay. And you said Guernsey is kind of a dying farm town, right?
Yeah, a lot of people are leaving because they're afraid that the barbarians are going to invade. The terrors are getting worse. The guard, literally, the people who watched out for the town are being conscripted to fight in the army.
Yeah.
So it's this town where there's this just sense that things are falling apart and we got to get out of here.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So the first thing, as a foster parent, is did the dad probably, as he's being conscripted, if it's a member of the community, somebody that they know of, they would have thought they were safe at least.
Right.
So probably a community leader or somebody that had some level of prominence, or at least somebody that maybe used to have some level of prominence. They would have asked them, or at least somebody that felt like they were a close friend.
Yeah.
I would think that a parent that if in that situation would have probably gone more with somebody that they thought they knew well.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, just because you know somebody well doesn't mean that they necessarily want to take on the responsibility of taking care of your kid, right? So that person would have had to have been given some level of like payment or recompense or something, and I think about, a lot of people talk about foster parents and they say foster parents like, oh, they're in it for the money. It's like, no, you got to actually care. You got to actually care about the kid, but the money is actually just so that you can balance things out.
Yeah. It's my sister's adopted. My folks are adopted parents as well. And you don't do it for the money.
Yeah. So I imagine it being like a neighbor, somebody that they know is going to be there for a while, secure enough that's going to be there, but that'd be willing to take, something in barter for them taking on the kid. All right. Now, just because you think somebody's safe, just because you think somebody is going to take care of your kiddo, doesn't mean that they have the ability to manage your kid, right? So very often it ends up being maybe this person took her on, and depending on the personality of Zill. So is Zill does she do what she's told?
No.
Or is she more of a
So Zill's dad was a member of the guard, and the guard in Guernsey, weren't just policing the people; they were protecting this village from the terrors. So he's this essentially a hunter, right? Who goes out into the fields and the forest and fights these creatures that are potentially going to attack the people of Guernsey. So he was raising Zill, teaching her kind of the basics of fighting. And so now he's gone, and here's this 11-year-old kid who's tough and willful and wants to fight, right? And I can imagine that being really hard on a caregiver. And she's angry and frightened. Her dad's now gone, right? So she would not be an easy child to raise.
See, and that's what makes me think that maybe it's an older neighbor, somebody that they've known, somebody that they feel secure with, somebody that's willing to take some household goods or something like that and be like, okay, well, I'll take on your child until you come home. But of course, this kid is too strong, too smart. I mean, their dad is a survivor. Their dad is a fighter. He's probably given her all of the skills and tools that she would need to at least, think that she knew how to go out there into the world and navigate it and stuff. And so this neighbor who would be like, maybe trying to shelter her and treat her as a child and try to incorporate her into like daily chores and stuff like that. Not going out into the wilds, not fighting, not being, that would grate on that child's mind. And it would push her to do something drastic,
I love it. So I also think it would be good if, what Zill gained from her father was, this kind of warrior mentality, right? But what does the caregiver do for a living so that there's this other skill set that Zill can be kind of reluctantly acquiring that may be useful in the story later? But what does the caregiver do that Zill is being forced to learn? She doesn't want to learn how to do this thing, because you're right, she wants to be out, running around in the woods with a sword. And instead, what is it she's being forced to learn that may actually end up being really important later?
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, you would think that, just for story balance, it's like, how does this character grow as a person? Generally, with the way that, family works, is that there's somebody that's kind of, you connect with because they're very similar to you. They're giving you insights into things that you're interested in, and that person becomes kind of elevated in your mind. But there's a person that's giving you all of the counter stuff, all the stuff that's like that balances out that. And usually, as much as you care about them, they get on your nerves. They irk you to no end. I'm thinking that she's got to have some kind of quiet skill, something meditative, something that requires a lot of time. That a kid that has that sense of immediacy, that needs things to be happening right away, that feels off.
So frustrating.
Something frustrating that would make her feel like she has to be driven to doing, to making a big move, right? So I'm thinking older person living in the community, not part of the fighting establishment, and also grounded and secure enough in that village that the father would leave her there, knowing that that person wasn't going to be unstable or move around. So maybe she's a craft person, maybe she's a weaver, or somebody that you said that there's these what are the animals that are the combination of like the cow and
the gowdles.
So maybe there's some kind of goods that come from that. Maybe there's like shearings that need to be turned into something, or I'm thinking like something like that, something like a textile skill, something that requires a lot of time and focus.
Well, it could be that leather work, because they have like it's almost like alligator skin, but I can't never describe it as alligator skin because there are no alligators in Veromia, so we'll have to figure out how to work around that. But yes, they've got this scaly leather, and somebody's got to learn how to make boots and armor and all this stuff out of this scaly leather. And that would be just very slow, methodical. You got to boil it. You got to, if you're going to make boiled leather armor, it's a lot of just, okay, I need you to go get water and I need you to put it over the fire and we got to get the water boiling. And then we got to dye it.
It would be cool too, if you think about it, that a hunter mentality, a fighter mentality, generally the town takes care of them. If you're out there and you're putting your life on the line and you're doing this stuff, generally you're not going home and having to then prep your own meals and things like that. You're kind of held in a level of respect, a higher echelon. So maybe she's just she's been trained by her father to do the hard skill, which is or the kind of like the dagger skill, which is the attack and go after. But she's not necessarily been, brought into that world of like having to learn how to gather, how to prep, how to maintain these things. So the fact that her father left her with somebody that has those skills, it's probably him realizing that, I've got to prep my child for tougher times. She has to have a balance. So when she leaves, when she's like, I can go and do this thing, and she's out there in the world, you got to hit her with some stuff that goes against her actual skill set, her actual focus. And then, she's going to be put in a situation where she's cold. She's going to be put in a situation where she's got to find a way to do the things of survival that aren't attacking and destroying a thing,
Yeah. The slow, methodical, that she resents. I love that. Okay, so this character, in this world, there are 4 in the Imperium anyway. That there are other places that don't recognize gender in the same way, but in the Imperium, they're very strict. There are 4 genders that are possible. There are Haman. We would recognize as men. They use he, him, his pronouns. They identify themselves by growing their locks out and growing their beards and mustaches longer, some really long, but some just short beards and mustaches, but they want that to be visible so that people can see that they are Haman. And they often, just pull their hair back into, it's not hair. The stone skins have these locks that grow out on them. Kind of coral-like, and so that's what the Haman look like. And then there are women, and they use she, her, hers pronouns. They identify themselves by they polish off all of the facial hair on their faces, the locks that grow out on their faces, so people see them, with these clear faces and say, oh, that's a woman. And they grow out. They often take a lot of pride in growing out their locks, put jewelry in them. They got these long locks. And then there are Zaman, and Zaman use they, zers pronouns, and they're sterile, they are asexual, they identify themselves by polishing the locks on their faces and their heads, so they appear not to have any of what we would call hair, right? And people can just see them and know, okay, that person's ace, essentially. And then there are Timon, and Timon use te, tier, tears as their pronouns. They're androgynous, they're bisexual, they're very sexually active, and they grow their locks into more interesting shapes. They sometimes will have long mustaches but no beard, or they will have long gout tails, but they are like a ponytail, but the gout tail grows from their chin, and then from the side of their head, or they're polish off the locks on one side of the head and grow them long on the other, and then people can see them and go, oh, I know this person is Timon, and I know what pronouns to use. So what gender is our caretaker for Zill?
Okay, it would have to be, because of the relationship that kind of establishing here as this being a person that is teaching them and bringing them into a different mindset than what they've grown up with. It would definitely have to be somebody that's the opposite of Zill's gender representation. So maybe one of the shaved head, shaved beard, asexual.
Zaman. I like it.
Zaman.
Yes. So we have a Zaman taking care of a girl who will be a woman, but she's the children haven't chosen, right? But Zill already has the sense that she will grow up to be a woman. She uses she, her, hers pronouns, and now she's staying with a Zaman who uses they, zers pronouns, and is not interested in relationships. She's ace, right? Or not interested in romantic relationships, and she's clearly willing to be in a parental role. And names are always tough. So do you have any sense of, I could come up with that later, but do you have a sense of what her name might be?
I don't know. Well, you're building such an intricate and very distinctive kind of language set or syllabic, way of representation in the world. So I'll leave that to you, because it feels like you want something that feels natural. I would think something short though, because it would be something that I don't know. It seems to me like a person that works in a humble skill, or they call them humble skills, but like something that is more supportive, a supportive skill as opposed to like a dagger skill that's like going out and doing something. Um, that they wouldn't have like something that felt ostentatious or had some kind of level of like when you say their name, it sounds like somebody that's like very heavy in the community. So I'm thinking something short.
I
And
like it. And
yeah.
as you know, this is a little pull back the curtain for readers out there. If someone's important in a book, you want them to have a shorter name because you don't want to have to type it every time.
Yeah.
If you give somebody a 4-syllable name, every time you have to write it, you have to write this 4-syllable name. So that's one of the ways. I mean, little insight here, a little secret for readers. If they have a long name, they probably won't show up a lot. If they have a short name, if you're Scout from
Yeah.
To Kill a Mockingbird, you're the main character, right? And if your
Yeah.
name is going to be,
Yeah.
so I like that. So I use name generators. Totally willing to use name generators, and I've got like 3 of them up here. And this one I like because it is. I think I could easily see this being a Zaman name. It doesn't have like an A ending that's inherently where we would go, oh, feminine or masculine. The name is Asker, Askr. So Asker is our Zaman character, and Zay are taking care of Zil.
Uh-huh.
And Zay makes leather. Like they work. They're a leather worker.
Yeah.
So their relationship with Zil is, they care for her, but they're boring her, right? That's
Yeah. I got this weird image in my head of when Zil's on her adventure out in the world, that something happens to her where she has to put together a bunch of skills that she learned from Aster, and she almost like in a loving way, in a kind of like sweet way, uses their name as kind of a curse, where it's just like, it's like
you taught me how to do this. Like, yes, that kind of reluctant acknowledgement of you would be so glad to see me doing this thing that I now have to do. I know this because of you. Yes, I love that. They keep just grumbling about Asker over the course. I love that. So she is living in this town. She's living with Asker. She's making leather armor and leather boots and that all kinds of leather work stuff, and she hates it. It's boring. She used to get to go out and run around in the woods, and her dad would kind of train her during the day. There are the terrors don't come out during the day, so they could go out during the day into the woods and she could play, and her dad could teach her all this stuff. And now she's spending the day in this hot kitchen. I like that idea. I hadn't thought of. There would have to be some compensation. So maybe what it was the dad gave Asker his house. You can have the house, but in exchange, you got to take care of my kid. And so Asker, who lived outside of town near the Gowdle, now has been able to come into the city and have this nicer home, which I could imagine Zil resenting. You've come into my space, and so then there is some kind of event that is the tipping point where Zil is going, I need to leave. And that could be some person is leaving and she sees it as an opportunity, or she has a breaking point with Asker, or somebody, what gets Zil to finally go, I've had enough. I am going to live with grandma and my aunt. I'm going to cross the continent.
It would seem like, I don't know. I'll just tell you the first thing that popped into my. So you said event, and I was thinking, all right, so they're working in like a craft skill, and they would have to sell stuff. They would have to, have moments where they were, in commerce with other people. Maybe there's a market. Maybe there's a market day or something like that. where they build up supply and then they do the market day. And I'm thinking that in the midst of doing this necessary but ultimately boring task for Bill, something has to happen. Like he said that the terrorists can't attack during the day, so of course market would probably happen during the day. But there has to be something else, some other outside presence, some other threat of some sort that would drive her to be like, I'm sitting here doing this support role while danger is happening, and I can't take part in it. You know, I had this picture in my head while we were talking and stuff of every night after working all day with their guardian, and before she goes to sleep, she's sharpening her weapon. You know, she's like, even though I'm not doing what I feel like I should be doing, I'm going to keep myself ready for it. And then if she's in a position where something is happening, because I'm wondering, and this is a world building thing. This is something that only you can answer. The terrorists attack at night.
Yeah.
The hunters are keeping the terrorists away from the village. But people are kind of crappy too.
Yeah.
So I would imagine that if there were raiders or, you know, malfactions of any sort, that they wouldn't attack during terror time either, because they would be in danger themselves. So maybe that's it. Maybe there's a malfactor of some sort. Maybe somebody that lives near the village that's not part of the village, that doesn't get to take part in the things, that comes and attacks or something during a market day.
I love this. So I think there's two ways we could go here. Either we already know, you know, Dad's off fighting the barbarians who keep invading. So we could have an actual barbarian invasion, you know, attack the town. Or you're right, the people of the town are not all magically good and wonderful, right? And so when the guard leaves, this is an opportunity for a bad actor in town to go, I'm gonna, you know, start stealing from people at the market. I can, you know, like I can do this now. Who's gonna stop me? And you know, what do you think? Do we go? My inclination is the bully in town is probably a more precipitating event than the person who is, you know, than a full-on barbarian invasion. That might reveal too much about the world too soon, right? So who's our bully character gonna be?
All right. So, I mean, you bring up a good point that, you know, it couldn't be a full-on barbarian invasion, because then the thing that she's longing for would actually be something that was coming into her space. You know, the action that allows her to feel like she has some control.
Yeah.
So it would have to be, it'd have to be like a person that was there, a bully character that doesn't necessarily work well in the community. And I'm thinking too, when you mentioned that that a lot of the conscripted fighters that are being taken away from the town, there would probably still be one, maybe one that's left, but it would be like an older fighter,
right?
You know, somebody who's done their time, has the experience, but maybe not necessarily.
The army doesn't want them. And they're the only, you know, it's the town sheriff is now the, you know, the beadle, you know, the only watchman left is this old guy who used to be, you know, people respect him because he did his time, but
he just can't physically keep up with what's going on. So that would leave a power vacuum, so that this bully, who before was just an antagonizer that kept his distance and people didn't mess with him, now he feels emboldened by the fact that the virile fighters are gone. So during a market day, it would be perfect time for him to come and try to, you know, express his dominance. And of course, your old fighter, your respected fighter, he's going to do his best, his level best to, maintain a sense of order. And I don't know exactly how that would pan out. Would he be able to defend it? Would he be able to, push him back? But whatever that end game for that interaction is, it's really just like it's something that sparks.
But I could see it being really, like, let's say it goes badly, in the sense that this person, he's the bully. He tries to posture, and the guard is like, sorry, you are not in charge of this town just because the other guards are gone. And then the guy, the bully feels very threatened, right? Like, I thought I was here to show off that I'm in charge, and now I'm being put in my place, and it leads to violence. And he actually kills the guard. And then it's the whole town is going, there's no guard. And the bully's going, I'm the guard now. I run this town. And that's why Zill's going, ask her, what are you going to do about this? Like, how are you going to, and Asker's going, I just sell leather. Like, I'm not. And Zill can't take it. And Zill's going, that's it. I can't fight him either, but I gotta leave, right? And so that could be what gets, she watches this situation escalate to a murder in this town where, nobody was killing each other before. Like, there was this pervasive sense of dread, but there was no violence. And now it's, somebody's dead in front of her, and she's like, I gotta go.
Which then makes her leaving not only an act of like, I've got to go someplace where I can do things, but it's also a sense of self-preservation, because she does not at all feel safe in that space anymore. And it would be something that would be something that kept coming back to her throughout the course of your story. That when faced with something like that, she thought it was stronger to leave,
Which could be a really interesting tension later, too, because she thought she would be safer to leave, and leaving isn't actually safer. Like, the town feels dangerous, but it's this pervasive sense that this town is unjust now. But it's not physically dangerous to her, and then leaving becomes,
this is feeling very, very, very much indicative of what's going on in the world right now. I'm feeling this is resonating with me, because I feel that sense of, that kind of existential dread. But sometimes you don't, especially when you're a kid, you don't necessarily always have the language to explain it, and it manifests in different ways. I can imagine Zill on the road, heading to a place where she thinks she can be her real self, her true warrior self, but then also kind of tracking back to those experiences from in the village, and the things that she learned from her guardian, and it giving her a sense of, like a deeper understanding of that dynamic when she was there.
And always feeling like, that self-doubt, should I have left? Maybe I should have stayed in that place. I thought I would be safe when I got to grandma and when I got to my aunt, and they, but on the way, maybe I've made a terrible choice. Maybe I should have just stayed where my dad told me to stay. And, and is he going to be super pissed when he finds out I ran away from Asker? And so, I think that creates a lot of interesting dynamic for her. So
it does. It gives her a lot to think about. But, and I don't know exactly how I mean, if you imagine this as being a one-off story, which, kind of encapsulating the whole narrative in one, or is it going to be tiered, like, this is the first leg in a bigger journey? You got enough world here that you built that you can come back and explore it a lot,
Well, and this will help. I mean, one of the benefits of this is, as we are discussing this, like, oh, now I'm seeing something new in the world that I'll get into the book. But my thinking is, maybe, I mean, she's got to cross the continent. Is this a character who's going to eventually get to the City of Smoke? Great, we've just created the backstory for one of my characters, right? Or not. And I want to be open to, if this is truly collaborative storytelling, maybe she never goes to the City of Smoke. Maybe she makes it to her aunt and grandma, and that's the end of the story, right? But this helps me flesh out the world, and we've got this. And so that's that idea of, it's a side quest. So
I'd love meeting this character after she's gone on that journey and she's grown up and she's internalized these feelings. I mean, how does that make your interactions with her? How does that color the way that she sees the world? That's so cool.
So let's do one more plot point before we cut it off and leave people with a cliffhanger. When she decides to leave, does she leave alone or does she go with someone else who's traveling? Does she, how does she sneak out of town?
Okay. So using the dynamic that you set up as far as that the terrors are out at night, it's safe to travel during the day. If we use the plot point that I brought up about the market day, is there communication, commerce between the villages, that kind of thing?
Yes, and somebody has to take the goutle meat and leather and grains and everything and transport it to sell in the capital, because the capital is so populous that it can't possibly sustain itself without these villages, which is one of the tensions in the whole kingdom, is as these barbarians are taking these lands, the capital is going to be under strain. And so, yes, there are merchants who are traveling back and forth across the kingdom. And that could be an interesting way for her to get.
Yeah, I mean, it feels real, like a kid, hopping a freight train. To kind of travel. So it's like, it also brings up, like, as far as, world building questions, it's like, for the people that do travel from village to village for commerce and stuff like that, do they travel? Can they travel at night? Is there a way that they can protect themselves? Or is it just like a Pony Express style thing where it's like, it has to happen during the day between the hours of this and this, and it has to be going fast and rapid?
No, I think it's my sense is the terrors, and we haven't explored what they look like, how they manifest, but they are more rare on the greater continent. So it's not the terrors are out every night. It's at any time one could come into your town, right? And so the merchants must be able to travel in wagons and protect themselves in some way at night, but it's dangerous. Like, maybe we'll be out on the road and one of these, so they've got to, carry goods in such a way that then they can hunker down at night, which then brings up an interesting question. I think this would be, an interesting way to think about this. Does Zill go with a merchant who is aware, or does she kind of stow away? So that she stows away with a merchant, and that's a good place for us to stop. Next week, when I've got a different author, we'll figure out what happens when that person finds out they've got an 11-year-old who has snuck into their cart and is now going to be traveling with them across the continent towards the capital. So that's an excellent stopping point. So thank you. This is, and this is the kind of exercise that we each do all by ourselves, where we're sitting there, kind of piecing. But I've never done. I've never co-authored a novel. I shouldn't say that. I tried my hand at it one time when I was in college, and it was a lot of fun. A fellow author and I traded off chapters, but I think this is going to be a great way to kind of build out this world, to get input from folks. So thank you. We've now got to start, and next week I'll do a little recap for Liz about where we're at, and then we'll just keep the story going. So folks will have to keep coming back to hear the story of Zill. So before we go, where can folks find your work?
You can find my work at believeandwonder.com. We have links to all of the online vendors that way. You can also pick up our books or order them directly through just about every major retailer. So Barnes and Noble, Powell's Books, even your small indie bookstores can order our books and have them available for you. So
yeah. And we will link to Believe in Wonder in the show notes, and then a few of the books. I'll link to the Nicholas the Maker series too, so folks can check that out, because I'm excited that you're coming out with the third. That's very cool. That's in the works. As somebody I am in the editing phase of the third in a trilogy, and I understand it is exciting, but I've also been seeing your drawings of Krampus as you've been working on those, and folks are in for a treat. So I will link to those. And then who is somebody that you would recommend in this time when we're, when everything that you're seeing going on in the world, who do you think would be a good guest to have on the show? Who's a creative, who's pushing back, who's got some ideas about how to kind of stay creative and healthy in this difficult time?
I would recommend, it's just within, we're part of a really great community of authors and people who are speaking to making things in a world where things is very tough right now. I would recommend Francis Pai Ippolito.
Yes, I have had Francis on, but I should have, because their publishing company, they just started a small press too. And so that, yes, which I think is not just an act of creation. I mean, it absolutely is. The work that she's doing, is wonderful, but it is also an act of resistance in this time to be fighting for marginalized voices. And she is company is really focused on telling the stories of Asian American, creatives. So I will actually reach out to Francis. That's a great recommendation. And folks who don't know Francis Pai Ippolito, just a really cool person. I believe she's even now the president of the Northwest Horror Writers Association as well, in her free time.
I know she's very, very connected in a lot of circles. She works with young Willamette writers. She's she is by profession a lawyer and works in copyright and that kind of thing. So
she's a judge.
She's got a lot of insight.
Is she a lawyer or a judge? I think she might be a judge. Actually,
I think so. I mean, you could tell me she was the chancellor of a small country, and I would not be shocked.
Right. Yes, I mean, she's a very, very impressive person. So I will. That's a great pick. I will reach out to her. Okay, so before we get to our send off, some folks I need to thank. Thanks to the artist Max Oakland, who reached out and provided one of his songs for our intro song, "I Prefer the Dusk." Let Max know you like it by following him on Twitter at Max Oakland with 3 Ds. And thanks to the author Stephen E. Scribner, who's the author of the Tawn Fantasy series, but he also makes music under the name S. Eric Scribner. And he donated his song, A Poem, from the album Pianosphere. And that's what we used during the ad break. So you heard a little bit of that. If you make music, you'd like your song used on the show, I'd love to highlight a listener's work like Max's or Stephen's song. So email me about that. Thanks to Doug, the producer, for making this show sound good and taking the blame when it doesn't. And I cannot forget to mention Writers Not Writing is a production of NotAPipePublishing. So please go to NotAPipePublishing.com, check out the amazing books written by writers who didn't procrastinate too much. And if you like this show, rate it and review it wherever you found it. Please check out Brian's Nicholas the Maker series and the new anthology. We should mention The Magic We Miss is out. And so I hope you'll check that one out, because I've got a story in there too. And one of the really cool things about that one is Brian did artwork for all of the individual stories. So you get, as authors, we got to see art of our own stories, which the one for mine is I use it in, you've probably seen it in my background images. It's my banner, on social media and stuff. I love that picture so much. So check out The Magic We Miss anthology, and the other stories in it so great. There are some that have just stuck with me. You have that where you're especially in Portland, you're walking around and you're like, oh yeah, I remember the story where the bridges got up and walked around. And
oh man, yeah. Every time I flip through the book, and I've had that great experience of the people who have read it now, and they're like, they can't see Portland the same way anymore. And I'm like, that was the hope. That was the hope.
Yes, one reader sent me a picture of himself holding the book in the Portland airport, and my story is set in the Portland airport. Like, it just hit as he was there. It was like incredibly rewarding as a well, I mean, it's very fortuitous. It was very cool. So yes, everybody check out that anthology, The Magic We Miss. That's a really fun one. I also want to give shout outs to supporters of the Patreon. Remember, folks who support the Patreon get a bonus segment. They get an ad-free version of the show. So thanks to Martha, the mysterious maven of memorable motorcycle movies, and Charlotte, the weaver of a web of winsome yarns. I tried to think of a W word for stories, and there just isn't one. So went with Y. It was close alphabetically. So Charlotte, the weaver of a web of winsome yarns. You can join Martha and Charlotte by becoming a patron of the Patreon for whatever amount is comfortable for you at patreon.com/Benjamin Gorman. I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. And let me know what official title you would like for your shout out, or you can just leave it to me and make one up, and then you might get one like Martha and Charlotte did. So that brings us to our send off. I have been saying to folks, remember, all writing is political, speaking is political, and not writing or speaking is also political, because silence maintains the status quo. So use your voice to make the world a better place, because silence isn't an option right now. And Brian, how about you? What is your reminder for folks going into their week?
This has been my mantra lately. And it's something I feel like people need to be reminded of. I know I have to remind myself all the time. Is that you are bright, you are brilliant, you are powerful. And that, I think that so much of what we do is we try to diminish our light so that we don't stand out too much. It's not the time for that. Be bright, be brilliant, be powerful.
Here's a tiny bit of our bonus segment just for supporters of the Patreon.
Well, in the course of the storytelling, very often people don't realize, like, what comes first. Is it the drawing or the writing? I think they assume that there's a process, and that there's an expectation of, I will write this much and draw this much and that kind of thing. So nobody ever asks that question. Nobody really is like, which one do you do first? Because I would love to tell them.
So which one do you do first?
I do them at the same time, which I think is weird about me, but also kind of beautiful, because I have a hard time when I can't write descriptively while I'm plotting. I just can't. I've tried it. My notebooks are just filled with entire pages that are just scratched out because I think they're terrible. Because my plot part of my brain is on the left side. It's more analytical, it's more organizational, and it's very much about finding how lines and stuff connect to each other. So I have a hard time writing good prose while I'm doing it. So I draw the pictures as I'm plotting, and often that
for
turns
folks
into
who don't know Brian, like, Brian will literally be. I've sat with you on a panel, and you're drawing as you're speaking and explaining things to this, audience.
Yeah.
So you're very capable of drawing and thinking about something else at the same time. It's like,
I do. I mean, this is my notebook for Nicholas, and I'll draw things called story maps, where it's like I'm plotting the story out as I'm drawing this picture, and so very often most of the character breakdown, some people do things like, oh, who is this character? Where do they live? What do they do? Instead of doing that, I will draw a picture of the character, and then I will add details to it to help me better understand who the character is.
And so
So
as
in
you're
my book,
drawing, are you thinking story in your head? Like that's your planning time while you're
this
doing
is my
drawing
planning time.
simultaneously?
Yeah, I don't write out a whole bunch of like, character breakdowns. I will draw a picture of the character to help me come up with who they are, where they come from, what is their connection to the story, what is their, what are the little idiosyncrasies about the person. And then that picture will, for me, be like a note of all of those things. Because every time I look at that picture, every time I look at that drawing, all of those things live in that drawing. So if somebody wanted to like, you got any character notes on this character? I'll be like, not really, no. I have a portrait of them.
Right. Right. And in the creation of the portrait, you were note taking in your head.
If I take